Hi, my name is Lafaya Mitchell. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been working with what I call hypersensitive children for several years. The children that I work with, they're often diagnosed with things like ADHD, Asperger's, autism, bipolar disorder, and various other moderate to severe social, emotional, and behavioral disorders. Over the time that I've been doing the work, I've developed my own philosophy on how to work with and deal with children who are extremely hypersensitive. I call that the Lafaya way. I've done several videos describing the Lafaya way. So if you'd like to learn more about that after listening to this video, then please do subscribe to my channel and look through all the various videos. It really helps you walk through how to work with children who tend to be a little bit more difficult to engage and work with. Today, I'm going to work on answering the question, does my child have Asperger's or autism? I've met many parents who their children are diagnosed with things like, reactive attachment disorder or ADHD, and they're saying there's something more wrong with this child than just ADHD. And the ADHD medications are definitely not working to address those other things that are wrong. Oftentimes, these parents are pointing out things such as some of the extreme sensitivities to foods, sounds, sights, maybe some awkward interactions as far as socializing. They tend to rub their friends the wrong way and lose a lot of their friendships. I'm here to tell you today that oftentimes if you've gone through the process of getting your child tested for autism, Asperger's, the doctors refuse to diagnose them with that, then I would just say don't worry so much about the diagnosis in particular, because sometimes it really doesn't help to know or to have a label, and sometimes the label's wrong. Sometimes the children are overdiagnosed with things like ADHD is very overdiagnosed. Asperger's tends to be under, and autism tends to be underdiagnosed because people expect that children should not be able to do eye contact or not be able to have reciprocal conversations and that kind of thing in order to diagnose with autism, Asperger's. And that's kind of an old school way of thinking about it, because there are some parents out there who can't teach their children these skills. So the child may not be comfortable with these things, but they can engage in ways where they can have back and forth conversation and that kind of thing. I'm not going to get too deep into the DSM-5 symptomology breakdown of Asperger's and autism. What I am going to do for you today is I'm going to try to help relieve some of that concern that your child is not being properly diagnosed. Now, one of the reasons that I say don't worry so much about the diagnosis is because sometimes the label is not really going to help your child very much. If your child is labeled as autistic or with Asperger's, a lot of children are going to struggle with that particular diagnosis because it's so misunderstood. To be truthful, honestly, they're giving autism a very bad name. So now they're using, oh, you're so autistic, like it's a negative thing for a person to have certain traits. So, it's something that maybe it wouldn't do you much good to have your child diagnosed in that way. Another reason that I say don't worry so much about the diagnosis is because I would recommend that you spend more time concerned about how to deal with the symptomology than the actual label. I know that some parents will say, well, the schools won't know how to work with my child if they don't have the proper diagnosis. One of the other truths is the schools don't know how to work with your child whether they have the proper diagnosis or not often. And if they do know how to work with your child, it's not based on knowing a diagnosis, it's on dealing straight with the symptomology. So if your child, say, has sensory issues with sounds and things like that, for them to know that the child is on the autism spectrum doesn't help you as much as for them to know that your child has sensitivities to sounds. Now, the second portion that I wanted to have you take a look at is some of the cultural issues around diagnosing. So oftentimes, like for me in particular, I'm African American or Black or whatever. Usually in the African American community, there's a lot of underdiagnosis because there is no attempt to have the child diagnosed. But it's common to have minority communities not want to have their children labeled a certain way. So they may just say, oh, that one's real sensitive, he's real sensitive, or she's real sensitive. They're more of the, okay, you're moving around too much, go sit down, as opposed to my child may need a little medication or assistance through therapy. Sometimes there's some cultural stuff that'll get in the way. So it can often be helpful too not to focus so much on the diagnosis, because even if you are a parent who would be diligent enough or would want to be diligent enough to find out what the diagnosis is, a lot of times your family won't care what the diagnosis is. They'll care more about how are you dealing with things. if you know your child is, has a difficult time trying new foods, then it's important to make sure that you're just sharing that with people and say in general, they don't tend to like to try new foods. Okay, so I'm going to send them with these things. And that's more addressing the problem as opposed to trying to put a label on it or something. And my third piece on this is I would like to see more people using terms like hypersensitive as opposed to focusing on the whole autism Asperger's piece. There are many children out there that they truly don't meet all the diagnostic criterion to be labeled as autism or Asperger's, but they are extremely hypersensitive. And they may lack a lot of the social skills, a lot of the expected behaviors that we have for them out in public. Say children who have gone through some type of trauma, or they simply have not had the proper behaviors modeled to them. A lot of those children can fall along some of the symptomology for children who are Asperger's or on the autism spectrum. And so sometimes it's not necessarily that they have something that's diagnosable as much as maybe they've gone through some type of trauma that maybe you couldn't classify it as a PTSD type of thing. They're not having backflashes, nightmares, or any of that stuff, but they're clearly highly emotionally reactive to the stimuli around them. So for kids like that, if you are going to put a label on it, then use labels such as like sensitive, hypersensitive, so that you know how to work with them accordingly. The Lafaya way kind of maps out exactly how to work with hypersensitive children and people in general. Because hypersensitive people, just a little tidbit, they tend to tune into the emotions of the other person, and they tend to be highly reactive to what's happening with the other person on the inside, not what the other person is trying to present on the outside. It can actually be a lot worse to behave as if, or try to act outwardly as if you're calm, when on the inside you're extremely agitated, irritated, or frustrated. To them, it will feel like you're being false or fake. They'll read into that the wrong way. So sometimes it's helpful to just use the words that you need to use. Like, your behaviors are very upsetting. They're very frustrating. And if you're feeling that come from me, I apologize for that, because I don't mean to put that off on you, but I need for you to, make this change in your behavior, whatever that change would be. But for all of that stuff, you can look into, again, some of my older videos. I address some of how to communicate your needs and emotional regulation for yourself so that you can help them to stabilize and become more regulated. To recap, the 3 points that I want you to really focus on is, number one, don't worry too much about the diagnosis. Don't over worry about what the diagnosis is, what the label is. And number two, keep in mind that there are sometimes cultural issues that get in the way of getting some of the diagnosing in place. To get around that, then you would use terms such as hypersensitive and such, and then give problem-solving ways to deal with the behaviors that you don't want to see. That's all that I have for you today. If you have any further questions regarding this video, then please do in the comments section leave your questions, or you can email me at info@pomtsolutions.com. Until next time, stay you and stay true.